Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Foreign Language Teaching Series. This is Anton Garcia Fernandez coming to you from Jackson in the state of Tennessee here in the United States of America. And this is a series of conversations that I have with teachers, with academics, with people who have been teaching a foreign language or literature for a while in different parts of the world. Here in the United States, as it is this case with our um, guest today. And this is a conversation that has been really years in the making. And I'm really happy that finally we have had the chance to sit down and chat and record this conversation. This is a very, very special guest, and you will understand why in just a little bit. I'm talking about Dr. Edward Friedman, who is Gertrude Conaway Vanderbilt Professor in the Humanities, Emeritus at this point. There's no doubt that Dr. Friedman is one of the foremost Hispanists in the United States. He's had a long career teaching at distinguished institutions and has made valuable contributions to the study of and scholarship on Spanish literature. If you have read about the Spanish Golden Age, you will know some of his books, classic titles within Spanish literary studies such as The Unifying Concept or The Anti-Heroine's Voice or Cervantes in the Middle and many others. And if you look at his CV, well, he has a staggering 200 articles published over the decades. And maybe I'm even falling short when I say 200, but it's just about that. It's absolutely impressive. And not only that, but Dr. Friedman was also my dissertation director at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, all those years ago. And I could not really have asked for a nicer and more supportive scholar to work with and to help me work on and finish my dissertation. Not to mention the many times that we would sit around and talk about music and Broadway musical theater and Cole Porter and the Gershwin brothers and everything else. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome to the Foreign Language Teaching Series from Nashville, Tennessee right now, Dr. Edward H. Friedman. Ed,
Thank you
it's
very much.
really a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Could I just say very quickly, Anton, what a tremendous pleasure it was an honor to have you as a student. You really were incredibly strong, both in literary studies and in making ties between literature and music. You were unique in that regard. And again, you're also one of the most linguistically talented people I know. Your level of English was always off the charts. And again, I really have appreciated staying in touch with you and your wonderful family. And I thank you very much for inviting me to talk with you today.
Well, it means a lot to me, and really, I some of the best memories of my life are tied to those years in Nashville and Vanderbilt. That's where I met my wife, Erin, and some really good friends that I've kept in touch with from those years, including, of course, yourself. And I just wanted to start our conversation by looking back a little bit, Ed, and wanted to ask you a little bit about, you were born in the state of Virginia, and I wonder if you remember anything about your relationship to literature in those early years of your life. In other words, what kind of books, if any, did you read as a child?
I actually always was a pretty active reader. And we live near a public library. So uh, my mother took my brother and me every week to the library. So I remember that there was I don't even know if it still exists, but there was a wonderful series of books called uh, Childhoods of Famous Americans. And it was kind of just these little orange or turquoise books that gave you a kind of background, but it was a biography, but with the childhood emphasized. And I remember just looking forward to reading more and more of that series and then branching out. I also became very interested early on in reading plays. And I think I like the idea that you could read a play in a day. And so uh, you could kind of get through a lot. But I appreciate these early visits to the library. And then again, just always saying uh, the most fun thing for me in school was really studying literature. And at one point, I said to myself, um, it's really nice if you can keep up with the literature, but add to it reading literature in a foreign language. So, you know, starting in high school, I would just be reading literature, but having a Spanish class where I would be reading uh, strong and interesting texts in Spanish. Um, Notably, for example, San Manuel Bueno Martir. Um, and again, just being very, very interested in expanding that literature base, the literary base, to uh, Spanish. And then, of course, uh, when I first started in this, Spain was kind of the prevalent territory, and then things opened up widely to uh, Spanish America, and that really changed things too. But there was so much that was uh, at the forefront of literary studies that emanated from, uh, say, the influence of Borges and others on uh, universal literature. So it worked out for me. Again, interestingly, I took Spanish because I thought it's just kind of a change from French. French was dominant. And then when I made the switch, it was kind of when Spanish was starting to take over for French because of the Spanish speakers in the US. So it was timed very nicely. And again, I think it was this idea that there was something unique and pleasant about applying literary studies and working with analytical skills in texts that were in languages other than English.
Did
So,
you at the time find it difficult to learn Spanish, or was it something that came sort of naturally to you?
yeah, I tell you that that really has a clear answer. What happened was that in working with Spanish in school, I became very strong in reading and in writing, and pretty much got, little distance from speaking. And so I had teachers even saying to me, your reading and writing skills are so different from your speaking skills. So it took me my junior year in Spain. In other words, um, there was a program called the Institute of European Studies, uh, and now it's called International Education of Students because they've gone beyond Europe. But I got to spend a year, and that just changed everything for me. Uh, I lived with a family, and I had classes in Spanish, had wonderful classes, but also I was just out on the street. And then the program had trips throughout Spain. So that was that third year of my college education was the most formative year uh, for me. And it kind of changed from knowing how to read and write to adding speaking to the list of things that I could work on.
I can definitely relate to that because I was always interested in British and especially American culture, but it wasn't until I actually traveled first to England and then here to the United States that, things began to really click for me when it came to actually speaking the language. And I think that makes a big difference, to be able to, with your knowledge of a language, travel to a country where that language is spoken and actually being able to use it. And that's one of the reasons why I think as professors we should encourage, maybe not make it mandatory, but encourage people to study abroad.
Right. And really, I think it's being there in whatever country we're talking about is so crucial to really kind of speaking with some kind of fluency and confidence. Um, and I think now, when I get on the phone, I have some relatives, one cousin especially, who calls me when she's dealing with uh, people who only speak Spanish, and and I think when I start talking with them, they always say, you're surprising me because you're speaking fluently, and so I think, again, it makes me feel good, but I certainly credit the program to that. And again, this idea that um, people with whom you came into contact in Spain, it was sort of, now I think it's a little bit tricky because when I was a junior, not that many people in Spain spoke English. Now they do. And
Mhm.
some of them want to practice their English, but you got to kind of force the Spanish uh, on them. But really, I just felt that that one thing that I had in mind, I can still do literature, but I can add to the base, and I can make it more interesting and more challenging by adding Spanish and Latin American literature to uh, the readings, and so I've always appreciated that. But it really was kind of trying to stick with my base, but do something a little bit different that landed me uh, where I am. And again, I think also that whereas people like me would always say, "Oh, I'd rather be a native speaker than a non-native speaker," but on the other hand, I feel that for students that I've had, the fact that I've gone through what a lot of them are going through has helped. So the idea that they're getting native and non-native speakers, I think is a good combination.
I totally agree with that, and I think it's important that they understand that the same thing that they're doing in Spanish, learning another language, in this case Spanish, was something that I had to struggle to do myself with English, and so
Mhm.
there's connections that can be made between those two experiences and those two languages in different ways, and that's something that you definitely did because you decided at some point in your life to devote your career to teaching. And I'm wondering if that is something that you already knew, or if that's something that you sort of happened upon, or did you know, like I always knew I wanted to be a teacher or a professor? Is that something that you always wanted to do, or was there a moment where you decided that's what I want to do as a career?
I, I think I think it was a little bit less clear in my case than it might have been in yours. I I wasn't 100% sure of what I wanted to do. I knew that I had what you might call limited skills. I wasn't going to be a scientist, for example, or a mathematician. But but the thing is, I was considering the possibility of going to law school. Um, and then it just occurred to me that if I did graduate work in Spanish, that I could teach in a college or university. So, I think at one point when I was thinking of teaching, it might have been high school. And then I thought, no, if I do, again, graduate work and get a PhD, then I can teach in college. And the idea of teaching in college really did interest me uh, intensely as soon as I thought of that option.
Is there a reason for that? That teaching at a university was more interesting or more appealing to you than, for example, teaching in a high school?
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not that I would in any way um, malign or express any kind of dissatisfaction with high school. The thing that I was thinking was, it's literature, that I really love. And in high school, you're going to be doing so much of uh, beginning and intermediate Spanish. So it was kind of getting into the literature that made me want to do the PhD. And again, I love uh, I love people and respect people who go into teaching. And I really did have some wonderful teachers. I had in my senior year in high school, I had a literature teacher who, for the first time, made me see that studying literature was about learning analytical skills and not memorizing what the teacher told you a text contained.
Mhm.
And I'm still in touch with that teacher. Um, so it's really, um, it's really interesting. He was so talented that he's one of those people who, after 3 years of teaching, got picked up to be a principal. And so that's a kind of a shame because he was so influential on me. And when I talk to him and I say, I really do remember your teaching me analytical skills. He says, I don't even remember any of that material, So it's
Well, he's become an administrator now, more than a teacher.
right. But again, it is so interesting that that literature and kind of this thing about saying, let me do it in a little bit different way. And also, in a sense, I'm glad, first of all, I was in a wonderful program at Johns Hopkins, but also I think that one of the toughest fields to be in is English. So by being in a Romance language department, that saved me from that intensely competitive English department sensibility. So
Yeah, I can see what you mean in that sense. As you know, my wife has a PhD in English, and
yeah, oh yeah,
and the situation is difficult or different, difficult in a different way in an English
yeah.
in English programs.
And also, your wife is incredibly smart, and she also is a great writer, and she knew how to deal with what she had to deal with. But I do think that one of the things that helped her was being a creative writer.
Hmm.
I think it put her in a little bit separate category within the English department, and it might have been easier to manipulate.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and in fact, since then she has learned to speak Spanish and is really very fluent Spanish speaker in all the years that we've been together. By traveling to Spain, like as you said before, she learned a whole lot. In her case, she didn't really take almost any classes. So definitely studying abroad and traveling will help you with your language skills immensely.
Now, do you speak exclusively Spanish with Libby?
No, we don't speak exclusively in Spanish with her, but we do use a mixture of
Mm.
Spanish and English. And when we speak Spanish to her, even if she doesn't respond in Spanish, her
Uh-huh.
response in English is the correct one in the sense
Yeah.
that we can have a conversation with her.
Sure.
So that's the important thing that she can understand. And then when she's in a situation where she realizes, hey, nobody here understands English, then she can plunge into it and start speaking Spanish. Like for
That's
example,
great.
when we traveled to Spain. Now, you went into graduate school at Johns Hopkins University, an excellent institution, an excellent program, and in 1974, you successfully defended a PhD dissertation, and that dissertation was on the structure of Cervantes's Comedias, and it was directed by Harry Sieber and Elias Rivers, no less. How did you decide on this topic? Was this something that you were interested in? Did you do it because you wanted to work with Sieber and Rivers? Was it a mixture of everything?
It's actually, it's not a fascinating, stimulating story, but there is a little story behind that. I became interested in high school in the development of realism in drama. And in high school, I started reading Ibsen and Strindberg. And again, as I mentioned, I liked reading plays. So I would just kind of get through so much stuff. So when I went to graduate school, the area that I planned on working in was kind of the development of realism in Spanish drama. And um, at Johns Hopkins at that time, um, as you mentioned, the professors were Elias Rivers, Harry Sieber, Paul Olson, and then there was a visiting professor in Latin American studies. Later, it was Alicia Borinsky. And the thing is, I went to Paul Olson and said, Dr. Olson, I'm interested in working in um, the development of realism in Spanish drama, which would mean that I would be working with you. And he said, that's not a viable field. I wouldn't accept that as a topic. It's not, in other words, the literature that you're talking about is not important, even though it's influenced by Ibsen and Strindberg. So won't, I won't help you along those lines. So then I said, okay, um, since the other two professors were in Golden Age or medieval Golden Age combined, I said, okay, I'll work with them and uh, I'll work on Cervantes, And so the thing is, by focusing on Cervantes theater, it also means, well, you're focusing on Don Quixote. So that was very fortunate. So I was lucky in that regard because um, Dr. Olson pushed me into working in another area, which has been really wonderful for me. So, and really, I have to say, I don't think he was wrong. I don't think that necessarily, if I were a specialist in Jacinto Benavente, whose works I read and liked, but I don't think that would have gotten me too far. So I think that uh, his kind of trying to set me straight was a positive thing. And then my decision to go with the other two and do Golden Age turned out to be good as well.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, you in fact has have published extensively on the Picaresque novel and Golden Age theater in Spain and Cervantes, of course. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, in what ways do you think the works of Miguel de Cervantes are still current, are still valuable for readers in the 21st century? We're recording this conversation in 2025. It's been centuries since the Quixote was published. What can we learn from reading these Golden Age works that to some people kind of feel or seem so far removed from the present day?
I think that's a great question. And one of the things that people like me think about in terms of that question would be Don Quixote is such a rich text. It's a text that brings in the literary past and points to the literary future. It's very meta in every sense. It's self-conscious. So it tells a story, and it tells the story of the composition of the story. And it really gets into the um, the movement of the plot and the development of the main character uh, and his squire, that story, along with the story of the composition of the text, this idea of at one point you run out of material, then you find a manuscript which is translated and it starts again where you had ended earlier. So it's that play of storytelling and self-conscious or metafictional commentary. And I think that you could say it's a text that's about a storyline and about the storytelling process itself. And so it's so rich and so open and so wonderfully self-referential that it's hard not to like, it's hard not to appreciate. But another thing that people point to is it's actually very entertaining, very funny. So you enjoy yourself, but you're also at times, at least you can be, very rich in contemplation of what Cervantes was doing. So you're seeing the process as well as the product. And I think that that's what kind of keeps it going. But it's also fascinating that it brings in um, previous literature. It's really kind of knocking idealistic fiction and romance and moving to the novel, but it brings in the past as it points forward. And so again, it's so rich and so, in a way, you could say, in quotation marks, duplicitous. It sort of is duplicating itself as it goes along. So it's funny, it's interesting, it's philosophical, uh, it's very literary, but it also has uh, a strong relation to the so-called real world. Um, and so I think, again, you can find that there's so much there. And again, that was so much ahead of its time. And then you can also work a little bit backwards and say, if you look at the most extreme new forms of fiction, you can see that there's a relation between the newest fiction, the newest trends, and the content of Don Quixote.
Hmm. And you mentioned before also that one of the things that when you were younger first attracted you about drama, about plays, was that they could be read in a day or quicker than a novel. Besides that, what else do you think has drawn you to to theater, to drama? Because we must point out that not only have you written about drama, but you've also written your own plays, your own works of fiction, often based on Cervantes or the Golden Age. So, what is it about drama that draws you in so much?
Yeah. I think that um, I like the idea of contemplating the director's role.
Hmm.
In other words, um, this is something I tried to sort of uh, share with students, this idea that if you're seeing a play, then you're reacting to it as spectacle, but there has been a director who um, decided what the bases of the performance would be, the selection of actors, set design, whatever, uh, or even readers' theater. There's still a kind of director's role there. So it's the idea that when you read a play, you kind of contemplate yourself as a director, and you think, and it's something I can say to students. Well, if you read this and then you were going to direct a performance, what would you emphasize? So it is this idea of the spectacle having a director and you're judging the director's decisions. If you're reading it and put yourself into that uh, director's chair, then you're making a certain determination. Uh, and so you're actually kind of, in quotation marks, reading the play in a certain way. But I kind of like this idea of the contemplative that, if you ask people, what would you do as a director? That's something different than going to the theater, seeing a play.
So it kind of draws you in because you can become involved in it and you can have your
Right.
own view. And that again is something that has a lot to do with Cervantes and with
Exactly.
the reception of of the text. You also mentioned that when you started learning Spanish, Spanish was starting to take over from French as the main language taught in the United States or studied in the United States, as it definitely is now. Maybe it wasn't a few decades ago, but it is now. Besides that, the fact that there are a lot more speakers of Spanish in the U.S. right now than they
Yeah.
were, let's say, in 1960 or 1970. Um, in what ways do you think the presence and the importance of the Spanish language have evolved throughout your career as a professor here in the United States in particular?
Yeah. I think one of the things is this idea that, we said this, Spanish is not a foreign language in the US. And it's sort of this idea that if there are so many Spanish speakers, it's worthwhile to know Spanish to relate in a deeper way, a more empathetic way with those speakers. So there's that kind of practicality of knowing Spanish over French in the US. Um, but there definitely was a time when, no doubt about it, the prestige language was French. Um, and um, and so again, um, you know, I think there were some times when people were not given credit for Spanish as a language, uh, and so again, as we've talked about, I kind of got into this in the right moment, but um, and again, uh, I think it's wonderful to know as many languages as you can, and certainly French is an important uh, language. But I think also what's happened is that in the schools have changed, and there's also an emphasis on, for example, Chinese. You know, so it's kind of an interesting thing. But uh, once again, that kind of practicality of knowing Spanish is very key. I do think also that in a way, if you're looking at absolutely contemporary headlines, you're seeing that it's really important for Spanish speakers to be protected in a way from the powers that be.
Hmm.
Because, there are things going on now that are stupefying. And, so I think if the community can have a certain, um, I think, interest in the Hispanic community, it's going to help the US be a better place.
Hmm. And since you're mentioning those current events, we could also point to the wave of shutdowns of foreign language undergraduate and graduate programs in our country in recent times, and different universities have been
Yes.
left without those programs, or the budgets have been reduced enormously. Is there anything, since you've worked at the university for decades, is there anything that you think universities can do to promote the study of Spanish? Since, as you mentioned, it is one of the most widely spoken languages in the U.S. What do you think the universities can do to promote the study of this language?
I think it's a great question. And the problem is, to me, in part at least, is that the universities want knowledge to be spread out. They want knowledge to be accessible, and they don't want these arbitrary rules to change things. So one of the problems now, it seems to me, is that schools are being told you need a certain minimum number of students. Well, in certain ways, you can't necessarily find, say, 8 people to do Portuguese, for example.
Mm,
You know, it's very, very hard. So there's a kind of anti-intellectualism that one has to fight,
mm,
but it's a tough battle uh, because the highest of forces is anti-intellectual in itself.
mm,
And um, so, again, when you listen to, I don't want to get too political, but when you listen to the president, uh, talk about education, it's not necessarily within the framework that we would see as the ideal
mm,
uh, forms of education, of teaching, of acquisition of knowledge. Uh, and so I think one has to be willing uh, to fight. But I do think that this idea of knowing Spanish is really important because, again, it's not a foreign language here. And sort of really play on that point. Um, but I do think that uh, that again, um, there's so much that's brilliant and wonderful about literature in the Spanish language. So you've got Spain and Spanish America, and with that, of course, Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula, and Brazil uh, in South America. And so I would really want to kind of emphasize that as much as possible.
Besides your professional career as an academic, in what ways personally to you, in what ways has it been valuable for you to know one or two foreign languages?
I think the empathy factor
Mm,
is key. I think the more you can relate to people, the more you can understand them, and that you can understand what they're thinking, what they're hoping for, and kind of aid in how you can help them acquire what they should have to um, should have access to without fighting for.
mm,
And so it's sort of doing the natural thing. It's kind of saying, um, you know, anytime you can help people clear the obstacles that they face, the better off they can be, and the better off you are. Um, and again, if you can help provide an example, great. And again, one shouldn't have to fight for the rights and privileges of others, but if you have to, you do it. Um, so again, um, I've liked, having the chance to be supportive of people along the way, and again, to just be an advocate um, of a number of things. But I think again, uh, if one can uh, be there for people, and uh, as as I mentioned, um, I like the fact that I can kind of help at times. Um, this cousin of mine in Baltimore who sees people that she wants to help, but she doesn't know enough Spanish. So she calls me and I talk with them. I really appreciate her willingness to tackle that because it's really helpful. And also, when they talk with her and they see that she really doesn't know much Spanish at all, they're kind of the first thing they say to me is kind of like, we're in shock that you're speaking Spanish, you know. And so I think, more of us should try to aim for that so that we can, again, and when I say I help the people that my cousin is trying to take care of, it's modest work, but it's still something.
Mhm. Do you think, Ed, that the coming of AI, of artificial intelligence, is more of a helping factor, or do you think it's more of a hindrance when it comes to teaching and learning a foreign language? Because a lot has been talked about it, and it's not very clear at this stage yet what the impact of AI is going to be for the future of language learning.
Right. I think it's a very serious thing. And I've tried to uh, think a little bit about what I would do. And I think my feeling is that at least to start with, I would ask students to write short essays in class.
Mhm.
In other words, you're in a room, you got the paper in front of you, uh, you don't have your machinery, um, and just write for a half hour, and then I can see how you write, and I can test it against what you turn in. Um, but it's um, it's sort of like that really frightening thing of is is the idea that cheating is okay as long as you can get away with it.
Mhm.
Is that what we're trying to convey? I think that's difficult.
Yes, absolutely. And since you're talking about the classroom and things that you can do in the classroom, in this case, talking about AI, but I remember taking a lot of the classes that you taught at Vanderbilt, graduate classes when I was a graduate student there. I think I took pretty much all the ones that I could take, and then I was even a TA in some of them, working with you for some of the summer academies and things like
Oh
that.
yeah,
So I remember your classes very well, even 15 years after the fact, 16, 17 years after the fact. But I wonder, in your experience as a teacher, how did you know that a class session that you taught and that you directed had been a successful class session? What needed to happen in one of your classes, literature classes, for example, for you to feel walking out of the classroom, this was a good session?
I, I think the answer is that, as you'll recall, and I think you are kind of very much in line with this, we don't do literature as I preach to you
Hmm.
uh, about what the text in question is saying. So it's the idea of promoting reading in advance and then dialogue on the reading. So if the dialogue is rich and fulfilling, if we, as the instructors, come out with some new ideas, you could say, I think it's been a success. In other words, I think the criterion for success is kind of leaving with a sense that there was productive dialogue. Um, and and so, you know, I'm now doing these courses in the OSHA program, and OSHA is a program for retired people, and and so uh, there there are many classes in the OSHA program, and so when I do a class, I say to them, okay, typically in an OSHA class, you're listening to somebody give a lecture, and that's great. In my classes, there's going to be pre-assigned reading and discussion, and you're not forced to speak, but you're asked to read in advance and you're strongly invited to participate in the dialogue. So the idea is if you don't want to read in advance and you don't want a dialogue, you choose another course.
Mm,
But, you know, but if I, but the thing is, the people who enroll in the courses um, want to be there
mm,
because they're interested in reading and they're interested in speaking. Now, when I've done these OSHA classes, the makeup has been very, very different. I've had from 20, which was the limit, to 6. Um, and now, in fact, I'm doing a class now, and I did have 7, but I had a couple people who said, I'm going to be on vacation, so I'm not going to be in the last couple classes and stuff. So I'm probably going to have, I think, in uh, my class tomorrow, I'm probably going to have maybe 3 people. And so,
mm.
but the thing is, as long as I can get them to speak, and actually in my current class, I think you'll like this. Uh, I have a contrarian. I have this guy who's really nice. He's even written me a complimentary note about liking the class, but he argues kind of against everything. So he's um, he's going, for example, I don't think A Raisin in the Sun is primarily about race. And, and that's kind of tricky, but it's this idea, okay, so just welcome that and, um, don't fight it. I did say to him, um, while I appreciate your comment, I'd have to say that I couldn't disagree with you more. And so, I tried to do that politely, you know, but, um, but
Oh,
like again, Uh, but then I see again, Susan even reminded me, but remember he wrote you this nice note praising the class. So it's true, so it's true. Just kind of accept it all and just, try to be there for them.
well,
Um,
this idea of dialogue, Ed, is something that has always attracted me about the American system. Maybe one of the reasons why I decided to come to the United States and study, earn a PhD here, and then work in the American university system had to do with that. The idea that there was a dialogue in the classes instead of just, as a student sitting there listening to the professor telling you what La Dama Boba really is about.
exactly.
Uh, do you think this is a specifically American approach to teaching literature, or is that something that you've seen in other parts of the world? Because it seems to me like it is specifically in American universities where I have seen this happen.
I think I think part of the answer to that relates to the fact that when I studied in Spain, I studied in a wonderful American program. So, in a sense, the Spanish teachers were wonderful. They did their own thing, but they had to comply with rules
Mm,
of this organization that employed them
mm,
and that I think gave them very respectable salaries. So it was kind of like, you know, um, say, um, when I was in my junior year, if you scored at a certain level on your opening exams, you could take courses at the university. So I was doing this honors program, so I didn't have to worry too much about getting credit for it. But um, but I went to um, literature classes at the university, and they were pure lecture, and um, and they were interesting, but again, no dialogue. Whereas in the courses through the program, it was university literature professors, but trained to open up the dialogue, give a midterm and a final, and be accessible.
mm.
Excuse me. So uh, again, that worked out very well. But so did by going to this university class. And whereas I wouldn't have wanted to have this as my protocol for education, I learned a lot from it.
Mhm.
And of course, um, the um, the teacher was well known, um, and so again, um, I think we take all of our experiences and build from them. Excuse me one second, I'm just going to get something to drink. But really, um, I think we all learn a lot, and I do want to emphasize again um, how much I really enjoyed having you as a student, how much I learned from you, but also just this idea of certain talents that you have. Your spoken English, for example, and also your tying in literature and music just always stay with me. But also, I think we had some fun kind of co-teaching
Mhm.
and and really, doing it from a kind of active participation perspective.
Well, I definitely did learn a lot when all of that happened, and it has stayed with me, and it really has been a pleasure to stay in touch with you all these years, and now get a chance to talk with you for this episode of the program. I want to wrap it up, but I don't want to forget to ask you two very quick things that, if you want to answer quickly, you can. Or if you want to elaborate, it's fine as well. I was wondering if you have any particularly special memories from your long career as an academic, or anybody you mentioned before, a teacher in high school that you really looked up to. Anybody that has been besides this person that has been, a big influence on you, somebody who you looked up to. Anything that you want to say about that, I'd like to know about.
I think, I think, for example, um, you know, I had, I really did have uh, very fine teachers all along, and I took I took 4 years of Latin and 3 years of Spanish in high school, and I had three different teachers, and they were all very, very good. And again, they taught me to read and write, and that stayed with me. Um, and they also started my third year class, started me on literature. So I'm very, very grateful for that. In college, I had wonderful teachers, and again, got to spend my third year abroad. So that was so incredibly meaningful. And I'm still in touch with people from uh, that uh, year, that academic year, 1968-69. I'm in touch with two people from my American program and um, and two people from my friends in Spain. And so um, I really, um, Susan and I still talk um, on Sundays from time to time with one of my friends from 1968 and his wife. So I mean, I think that's very, very memorable. But also, I just I have to say that uh, I think students that I've had all along the way, including you in your dual role with me, but I've really been so grateful, and um, I really um, I really would say that the pleasure that students have given me has really made such a difference. And again, I really so appreciate the fact that through this Osher Ali program, I'm still getting to teach at my advanced age, and something that I'm really um, looking forward to. And I uh, I have a class tomorrow uh, where I think I mentioned uh, we're reading A Raisin in the Sun, which is a difficult text, and so I'm so grateful to have that chance. But again, um, you're being so kind to give me this opportunity. I also want to ask you, if you don't mind, to will you, like when you um, get your new house, would you send us a picture of it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we'll take pictures from the outside and and the inside once we're settled, and I will definitely do that. It looks really, Ed, like retirement has been treating you well because you're not completely or fully retired. You're still teaching.
No, I know, I'm so grateful for that, and really the OSHA program has been kind to me in that regard. And, I so appreciate it. And again, I'm going to see now, I've put in uh, some, to do a class in the fall. So I'm going to see, you know, they said tentatively fine. So I have to see if they stick with that. Um,
I'm
As
sure,
long,
I'm sure they will.
as long as they want me, um, I'll want them. So, and if when they say no, I'll say thank you. I'm very grateful for what I've had a chance to do. Uh,
My final question to finish and wrap up the conversation, Ed, is it has to do with young students. What words of advice do you have, or would you have, for young students who want to follow a career in Spanish as teachers in high school or professors in college? Students who are thinking of becoming Spanish majors or who are already Spanish majors or who may want to go into graduate school right now in the year of 2025. What words of advice would you have for them?
I'll tell you, I think the thing is that things are less foreseeable than they used to be. So I think um, even though it sounds a little bit pessimistic, I think I would say it's not a bad idea to have a backup plan.
Mhm.
In other words, if plan A doesn't work, have a plan B that seems acceptable to you, because I think there's more mystery out there than there used to be.
Mhm. Well, that's definitely something that's important to bear in mind. And, I just wanted to uh, close this conversation, Ed, by thanking you again for spending some time with us today, chatting about Spanish and about academia and about your long and illustrious career, which is not finished yet because you're still teaching and you will still do it for as long as they will give you a chance to do it. And I know that one of the things that really has been uh, that has meant a lot to me personally, having you as a mentor and a professor and a dissertation director, has to do with the generosity that you've always had with your time, with your ideas, with your support, and that's something that I try to do with my own students to pass it on, so to speak, because I think it's an important thing to do, whatever it is that the students want to do, whatever interests they have. It's always important to sit down with them, put in the time to chat with them, to listen to them. And I think that's important so that they understand they have a perspective, but there are other perspectives that could be good as well, and that could be valuable, and that could help them, shape what they want to do in their future. That's something that I'm very grateful to you for, and I'm trying to do in my way the same thing with my students. So once again, I appreciate your time, and it has really been truly an honor to have you today as a guest on the Foreign Language Teaching Series podcast.
Thank you. Can I mention one thing really, really quickly?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention something that um, that has been important to me along the way. Um, I found, and I think my colleagues have found, that students are very responsive and very hardworking when they see that you have been hardworking.
Hmm.
In other words, if they see that you've put a lot of effort into organizing, planning, teaching a course, they're willing to put in a major effort. And so I think that it's key to try to make sure they sense that this hasn't been a whim on your part, that uh, you've poured yourself into the enterprise.
I think that's part of being fair as well, isn't it?
Right, absolutely. But thanks so much for giving me this opportunity. It's always a tremendous pleasure to be in touch with you. Susan and I send our regards always to you and the family. And let's do stay in touch, please.
Absolutely, and our regards from here from Jackson, Tennessee, just about an hour and 45 minutes away from Nashville, Tennessee, where Dr. Edward Friedman has joined us on this call on the Foreign Language Teaching series. And my name is Anton Garcia Fernandez, just signing off now from Jackson, Tennessee. And of course, if you have any comments, anything to say, you can leave those comments underneath the video, and I will respond and engage. Because as I always say, YouTube is also not just a repository of information, but it is also some kind of social media platform as well, where people can actually interact, always cordially and always with respect, the way that Edward Friedman has always approached not just the classes, but I can see that everything in life. Thank you very much, Ed, and we'll be in touch very soon.
Thank you. Take care.